Oh, ladies and gentlemen out there in internet land, it's so good to see you all. How are you? It is November 218th, I think, and in this year that never ends. But we are here every Tuesday with our reasonably fine art talk. And sometimes I talk about what's on the easel. Sometimes I talk with various people who I like and admire. Today we've got kind of a combo of the two. Very, very special guest today. Someone who I first met, I think about 4 or 5 years ago up at Door County Plein Air event. A wonderful, wonderful watercolorist from Minnesota, whose work, as I think you'll see if you're not familiar with him already, is just beautifully unforced and lyrical, and there's just so much to admire. And I admire his work so much that I'm taking an online class from him this semester or this
Truly
year.
An honor. That's an honor for me too, my friend.
So anyway, my guest today is the great watercolorist Andy Evanson and his cat Pepper's butt.
She'll figure out a way to squirm in here eventually. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Andy. Great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
And as ever, the wonderful Betty Sue, my beloved ladies and gentlemen, Betty Sue, excellent singer-songwriter of Austin, Texas. I urge you to join us tonight at the Nobody's Happy Hour, which starts at 7:30 Eastern and goes till 9 p.m. With the amazing spinning wheel of doom, the wheel of misfortune, where her guest is Shawnee Kilgore, and they will be like audience request cover is one of the things you spin, and and then we in the audience put in a song request, hopefully of a song they don't know, and then they have to make up new music to go with the lyrics. I'm hoping someone some week doesn't know the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald myself. Anyway, Andy, it is great to have you with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, actually. Kind of enjoying still the downtime. Every once in a while, the doldrums kick in, but you had the same kind of schedule as I had. We were both on the road so often. I'm not sure how you feel about everything, but I've actually come to adjust enough to being home to the point where I'm going to kind of miss it when things get crazy again.
Right. No, it's very true. I love traveling. I love being on the road, but I've also really come to enjoy. I just go from my house. This is my house, and then my studio is about a half mile away, and
nice.
Go back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
I have a set of cats who don't like me in both places.
That's funny. So your studio is that close? Do you do any painting at your house, or do you?
No.
Okay.
No, I watch my online lessons from you at the house.
Yeah. So how's that going so far?
Oh, we'll talk about that later. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
What I thought might be nice is let's actually just talk about you and your journey, and then look through a few pieces that you've graced us with. But how did you come? I believe you started out, as many of us did, in commercial art. I was a graphic designer. You were an illustrator?
Yeah, medical illustrator. Yeah, which I just went through the illustration program at the University of Minnesota, and there is actually, you can get a medical illustration certification from a handful of medical schools, but I didn't go that route. I got hired by a studio in Minneapolis that specialized in medical art, and I kind of learned on the job. And then decided.
So this is a pancreas.
What's that?
So this is what a pancreas looks like.
Exactly. Yeah, you kind of, that first experience you have in a cadaver lab, you never really forget that, but I was surprised. It never really affected me that much. I think it would be a different story. I have had the opportunity to see a couple of surgeries, but the cadaver thing, you just kind of get used to having arms and legs and stuff out in front of you, working on. But that medical device company, that was most of my clients. This is a big area for it. Minneapolis, St. Paul's kind of medical alley with the Mayo Clinic here, and Medtronics and St. Jude, all these research facilities. The University of Minnesota is a big research facility. So I was very busy as a medical illustrator. And I just started painting watercolor because eventually all the illustration work started to become digital. I was doing all my work on the computer, and I just kind of missed having brushes and pencils and stuff in my hand. And watercolor just seemed like a natural transition. It was easy. I could do it, quickly from home. I've always loved watercolor. And I took some oil classes from my friend Joe Paquette for several years too. But
great artist.
Yeah, really good artist. And we're still very good friends to this day. I kind of decided after a while that watercolor was my thing, and decided to stick with it. And it's been going well. I've gotten to the point now where I still do a little medical illustration project here and there, but I'm just way too busy with watercolor.
Right. Well, now it's interesting to me that watercolor just felt like the right way. It felt like the most profound way for you to tell your story.
Yeah. Yep. I like to draw. I've always loved to draw, and the fact that I could, start with a pencil sketch. I don't know if that was part of it too. Even just the marks that you make with the watercolor brush felt more like drawing to me, working on paper instead of canvas. And I don't know what it is. I don't want to say impatient, but I get really excited about a subject, and it kind of wanes rapidly. I can't tell you how many times I've come home from a trip, like overseas from China or something, thinking, oh my God, I've got enough reference materials to paint China for the next 4 months, and I've got all these photos, and I'll pull them out a month later, and I'm just like, I'm not excited to paint that anymore, and that's on a much more macro level than one subject. But watercolor is just such an immediate response. You can get your paintings done quickly while I'm real jazzed up about it, and then I'm on to the next one. So which when I was out painting with Joe a few weeks ago up on Madeline Island, and he would go to the same location, morning after morning after morning, working on a huge canvas.
Right.
And I don't know. I can't do that. That's not my personality, I guess.
Right. And do you primarily paint plein air, or do you do a lot of studio stuff as well?
A lot of studio stuff as well. Yeah. When I first started painting, I learned basically just working off of photographs.
Right.
And then once I got more comfortable, I started getting outside. But Minnesota is not exactly conducive to plein air watercolor. Even when the weather is nice, it's humid and buggy and windy or whatever. So, there's a limited time to get out and actually work on location. I do it whenever I can. I love it. But I try and approach, even if I'm in the studio, that time limit that you have usually on a plein air painting comes into play. Going back to what I was talking about before, I just I wet the paper and start going and keep going until it's dry and I've got the details in and I'm done.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea how nerve-wracking your watercolor is. Because the nice thing about working with oil paint is the light may be changing or whatever, but the oil paint is going to stay workable on the surface for a good long time. This watercolor, it's like you're trying to make a souffle. The timing is just like
timing is everything.
When did you go full time with the fine art?
Well, at least 10 years ago, I think. And like I said, I would still kind of do a medical project here and there. But about 10 years ago was when I started traveling more internationally, getting asked to teach more. I had finally gotten signature membership in some of the bigger, watercolor societies. So my name was a little bit more well known. It takes time to build all that up. And
right.
I'm very fortunate to have another income where I wasn't in a rush, to get my name out there and pump. And this was before, when I was doing this, we didn't have Instagram and, Twitter and Pinterest and all these other things. You had to hope to get exposure in a magazine article or something to get known. So it's a lot easier now to get your work out there. But I took my time and I just slowly started getting better at it. And, like I said, I was very fortunate in that regard that I wasn't in in a rush to try and get into galleries and stuff.
Right. Well, let's take a look at the pieces that you sent over. These
Sure.
are recent pieces you've been working on. Why
Yeah.
don't you just talk us through it? Tell us a little about this piece.
Okay, so this piece is representative of kind of what I've been doing during lockdown. Just kind of noticing we talked about this before about how I've been home so much more, not on the road and living out of hotel rooms. And, just with the news cycle and everything, I found myself, just to clear my head, I would go I call it a walk around the block, but we live out in a small little country town where the roads, basically the intersections, are a mile apart, 180th Street, 190th Street. And so I would just do a 4-mile walk around the block, around the bean fields and the corn fields, and just to try and keep my sanity and listen to music. And I found myself just really enjoying on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, the difference in the skies and the colors of the bean fields, and and how my mood affected how I was seeing things, the world around me. And so I started doing a lot more paintings, just this little area of Vermilion, Minnesota. And again, I'm sure a lot of them speak more to me than other people because I'm so familiar with it. But I think that's important too. And I talked about that in a recent webinar about, painting what you know and what you love, and making sure that that's your contribution to the world. Because nobody else, there's not another artist in Vermilion, Minnesota, right. A visual artist, especially.
Right. I think that's so true. And it's interesting to me in taking your class, a bunch of the points you're making are identical to the points I try to make. And so I think kind of our grounding, and part of why your stuff spoke to me so much, or speaks to me so much, is I think there's kind of a similarity in kind of bedrock belief about A, why we do this, and B, what the narrative truth is, which is to express one's own story as directly and unpretentiously as possible.
Yeah.
And in a very practical manner, one of your big points in your teaching, you emphasize people doing value studies first and creating like one big shape that ties the whole thing together. And shape can wax and wane and get small and then get big. And I'm looking right here, you have that beautiful shoulder of the hill on the left-hand side, lower left, that very gentle coming down, and then it gets, and it swells up with the mass of the trees and then gets minute to, I guess it's a structure, whatever the dark shape is, against the pure white sky, then up again into the other mass of trees. And then you carry us out on the right-hand side with that little beautiful burst of the turquoise blue in the sky above. But the lyrical nature of that dark mass, just beautiful there, Andy.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I've come to appreciate the simpler things too, and again, like I said, this spoke to me because it was something I would see every day on my walk. And but you treat it in a manner that if you're emotional about it, I think that comes through in the painting, that lyrical nature of it. And again, with watercolor here, this one was so tricky because there were edges in there that I wanted soft. There were edges in there that I needed to be crisp, darks against light. So that whole thing, going back to the timing of when you have to stay out of an area and when you can go back into it, and not overwork it. That's the death knell to watercolor too, is just keep going on it and trying to make it perfect, is knowing when to stop.
Yeah, that as I posted on the class chat group yesterday, that my watercolor that I did yesterday looked like a mouse got involved in a paintball game.
I saw that. It's real easy. Yeah.
Let's take a look at the next one.
Sure.
Miss Betty Sue. Here we go. Oh, this one. Oh, this one, ladies and gentlemen. Phenomenal subject matter is railroads, so obviously I'm going to be a sucker for it. But look at the light at this, ladies and gentlemen. Look at this. Look at the massing. Back to the big shape thing. Look at how the shadow shape on the left ties it. Even though there's that bright, beautiful light behind it, that massive shadow, it gets down into this squeezy little thing, and then back the big dark shape of the wooden structure over on the right. Mm-hmm. And he also carries that shadow all the way across with the shadow of the crossing signal in the foreground. This is just a beautiful painting, Andy. Talk to us all about it. Hey, Shelby Elby.
Hey, another hero of mine. Hi, Shelby.
Exactly, Shelby. We're going to have you on if you'd like to at some point soon. You saw him yesterday with Eric. Loved his value study. Yeah, his value studies make you want to hit him.
But they're everything, and what you go back talking about this connected shadow shape, and it looks like it's broken up in some other areas. Thanks, Jeff. But even just when you go up that, it was important that crossing signal, that it didn't divide the painting too much. So as you go up it underneath where the little, the red flashing lights are going to be, just that little bit of shadow being cast from that area to connect back over the trees and come back down, kind of creating that uninterrupted path for the eye.
Very, very good point. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That is sleight of hand, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, just trying to find those areas so that the eye can continue. The more you break it up, the more visually confusing it is for the viewer to comprehend and appreciate. So, those value studies, when I'm trying to connect the big shapes, they serve multiple purposes, especially with the fluid nature of watercolor. It helps define those lost edges where you're just kind of letting the water and pigment do its thing. But it's also, I don't profess to be an expert in composition by any means, but they get me thinking more about the importance of shapes, and how your painting is going to read from across the room, and not just when you're working on it where your face is 6 inches away from it. Seeing those big shapes, making sure they read correctly, that's the most important thing.
Right. That's absolutely true. And that's where people often will, I think people confuse, or people think there's some magic to composition. Composition per se isn't that hard. If it's not your natural bailiwick, basically sticking to the rule of thirds is going to serve you well.
Right.
I mean, you've got the lower third is where all that big shadow action is, and then over on the left you've basically got the strong vertical, maybe a little to the left of the first third, but basically in there.
And that's literally about the only consideration that I give to composition, is that rule of thirds. But then, I look at one of my heroes, Andrew Wyeth, and I see how many times he breaks the rules of composition in his work. So I still try and stick to that, especially when I'm teaching, to make people on the right track. But I've started to worry less and less about it.
Exactly. Because the more comfortable one gets, the more you can not follow the rules exactly, but you are aware that you need to balance it in some other way or something. But you've got to have awareness of the rules, or otherwise it's just a big soup of confusion.
Excellent point. Yeah, it's important to stick to some of those rules while you're figuring things out and making sure it works, and then you can start breaking the rules.
Right, which it's a cliche, but it's a really accurate cliche.
I agree.
I got to just be kind of a fanboy on you for a moment here. Ladies and gentlemen, there's so many beautiful passages in this, but there's one little bit that I just look at and it doesn't take my breath away more than any other bit of it, but at this moment right now, I'm just looking at it, especially since I've been trying to paint in this damn style, and now realize how hard it is. Let us look on the extreme left, the bottom half on the extreme left, that fence where he's got the light on the ruined brick building behind, that bright light, just behind the fence, and then the building goes off into kind of more traditional brick color as it goes up. But then the sharpness of the light on the building, and then the fence line, and then the light at the bottom of the fence, and then the bleed of the fence color into the area of the railroad tracks. That's just magical, Andy.
Thanks so much. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, I consider some of it ahead of time, but so much of it is just luck. Truth be told, I wish I could say that every section of this was well thought out and well planned and it was all intentional, but a lot of it is. But a lot of times you just have to be thankful for the fluidity of watercolor, and that's where that magic happens, where some of those little passages just do things that, oftentimes they're not what you planned and you might be disappointed in it, but eventually you just kind of learn to embrace it and realize that that's part of the charm of watercolors, some of those little passages, and don't try and control it so much. Let it happen.
Well, we've got to get, I do have a rule breaking video, Shelby. I don't know the rules enough of watercolor to break them with any kind of coherence yet.
You will. You're amazingly talented. You're going to figure this out pretty quickly.
Let's go on to the next one.
Okay. So this was, I just kind of found myself recently missing all the international travels. I was talking about all the cancellations. I was supposed to be teaching in Spain and Scotland and England and China again this year. And for as much as I appreciate being around home, and I've been painting vermilion every once in a while, I want to go back to that international flavor. And I had done on location, a small version of this painting when I was teaching in Todi, Italy, several years ago. And I've always, I had a couple different photo references of it too, and I've always kind of wanted to revisit it and do something maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit more accurately. And so I just pulled that out recently, and it's still just a quarter sheet painting. But this is going to be, I entered this into the AWS show this year. I wanted to put something in that was a little bit more contrasty. I think in the last couple of years I've entered paintings that and we're going to look at one coming up soon here with fog and stuff too, just some things that were a little bit more intimate and moody, but I really liked the shapes on this. And I tell my students this too. One of the important things you have to remember when you're entering some of these larger exhibitions, and I've judged several of them too, with that first round, especially when there's thousands of entries, the judges can't look at every painting with a fine-tooth comb at that first. They kind of go through these stages of, boy, that one catches my attention, and that one, and they start whittling it down. And then when it gets closer to, picking the ones that are going to be in the show, and then especially for awards, you kind of do a deeper dive into things. But it's kind of important to find something that'll grab their attention on a computer screen when they're flipping through them a little more quickly. And I thought this one hopefully will help. We'll see what happens, but there's no guarantees. I didn't get into any of the big shows last year, so you never know.
This is interesting. This reminds me a bit of like John Singer Sargent watercolor.
Well, yeah, he did all those Italian watercolors, and you're always kind of channeling your idols a little bit. It's hard not to.
It's interesting. So much of your stuff has this beautiful depth to it, and this is very much, the picture plane is very much
exactly.
Yep. How did you did that frighten you at all, or was it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Especially after all the paintings I've been doing out here, where there's nothing blocking your view for 30 miles, it's just farm fields and flat and distance. And then all of a sudden you get to this stark thing, like you said, where the view is just stopped there. But it's still, when you go back to it, going back to the value studies and looking at that shadow shape, you can follow that shadow shape as it connects all the way around, through the painting, weaving through those shapes. And that rule of thirds, look where the little tour group crowd is down there on the lower left. Making sure the placement of some of those images were compositionally well thought out. But yeah, you just have to. The most difficult thing about this painting was trying not to get sucked into all the ornate detail and still trying to simplify it, which is you want to be accurate but loose. And I go for that on most of my paintings. I try and paint loosely but accurately enough so it still looks based in realism. And that was really tricky on this scene, just to not get bogged down into all the little intricate details on that cathedral.
Yeah, but boy, you handle that so beautifully because it does have all that suggested detail, and yet, when you look at it, it does just it backs off to just being brushstrokes again.
Yeah, and keeping it loose. And look at how another thing I tell my students, even going for accuracy and painting something like this, I don't think there's a straight line in this painting. When you really look at it, if you zoom in, I don't. That little bit of inaccuracy, I don't use masking fluid. I don't tape off edges, and that kind of stuff. I just use the brush, and that lends, as tight as this scene could be, that lends a little bit of vibrancy and looseness to it. I think when you just trust the brush marks and not be worried about if everything is perfectly straight. You can see that on the left edge of the door and on that column to the left of the door, and it definitely with it in its shadow and stuff. And it doesn't, maybe it might bother some people, but that's never bothered me.
I think it reads beautifully. And if all those steps were exactly, if you'd measured them all to be exactly the same, I think it would be jarring.
Yeah. I have no interest in painting that tightly. That's why I started painting to begin with, was to get a break from illustration. So
I had a very good friend, a guy named Calvin Kahn, who's no longer with us, sadly, but he gave me my motto, which is have big fun, make big mess. But he also used to say, when you'd say, "How you doing, Calvin?" He'd say, "I'm consistent with my inconsistencies." And your inconsistencies make for an extremely consistent painting. It's a beauty.
And that's another, thank you very much. But that's another thing too, that whole question of a style. If you're painting different subjects all the time, which I had been, over the course of the last several years, just because my travels and teaching took me all over the place. One week I'm in Southern California, then I'm in China, then I'm back in Minnesota, then I'm on the East Coast in Maine. And so you have to be careful that your work isn't jumping all over the place too.
Right.
So it's how you handle those subjects in a consistent manner, the consistency of the inconsistency of the subject that still hopefully lends it to be, recognizable as one of my paintings, despite the subject matter being all over.
Right. Let's go on to the next one.
Oh, back to the Midwest. It's so strange, and I don't know. I can't even put my finger on it. What attracts me to a subject or a scene? I mean, this is something that you see, everywhere, every small town, USA, and for whatever reason, like I said, that when you get excited about a subject and you just want to dive in and tackle it, and I love that old 2-story house. It just looked like something that I had lived in the upper apartment, in the college years or whatever, and the reflection of it down in the water, and the beautiful shapes throughout the whole painting. The challenge of this one was making sure that sidewalk or the bike path didn't completely divide the painting in two, and that's the importance of the tall pole and a couple of shadows and stuff, just trying to find some kind of a way to connect and merge things together.
Yeah, that is a remarkable accomplishment, because not only do you have the bike path, which is probably pretty clearly an old railroad branch line.
Exactly.
But you've also got the pond. So the viewer is on the far side of a pond or brook or whatever. But the viewer is on the far side of that. So there's the barrier of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And there is the barrier of, I've got a cat now. This is Charbonneau, but he's in the shadows.
So, oh, nice.
Yeah. But So you've got the barrier of the water, the barrier of the bike path, but how do you get the viewer? Talk a little about how you get the viewer to go through, to come through the through those barriers
Sure.
to the house.
Well, that's the importance of the light reflection of the house, obviously in the water. You know, the shore of the bottom of the pond is a horizontal shape, all those strong horizontal shapes, but the reflections coming down, that vertical shape leads the eye right from the bottom of the painting up. Right. And even though it's not physically connected, it's still connected to the house because it's the reflection of the house. So your eye automatically just kind of bounces up, you know, beyond that bike path up to the house itself, and sees the connection that way. And I've been asked by people, you know, in my landscapes, why do you put in power poles and power lines and stuff? They're so ugly. But I tell, and this is a great example of that. I tell them, how often is the landscape just a series of horizontal shapes, the sky, the horizon line, the water line, the roads? You need some of those vertical shapes to break it up and help the composition. So plus it's, you know, it's part of the world we live in. I don't take those kind of things out. I think it lends a little bit of accuracy to them, but more importantly, the compositional elements of leaving some of those poles in.
When I teach, I describe it as the utility poles stitch our world together.
They do.
It's the earth and the sky, you know.
Yep.
And I think trying to take, I think it's a wonderful challenge to take the mundane or the nominally unattractive and have it be part of a lyrical work.
Yeah. And that's another good point that I tell my students, and that was a hard lesson learned by me, but I think it's valuable advice. It goes back to something that one of my idols, Joseph Zabukovich, also talks about, as far as don't, you know, compete with your reference or don't compete with the scene. But if you are trying to find something that's already just so amazing as a photograph, a reference, or a subject, what are the odds that you're going to be pleased with your painting, trying to represent that? You're setting yourself up for disappointment right from the get-go. Whereas if you can find something more mundane, or, you know, whatever it is, with the scene, and you're excited about the shapes and the colors or whatever, and you can elevate the ordinary, you know, and try and handle it in such a manner that shows an appreciation, where people look at it and say, wow, your painting is better than the scene, and not vice versa. So I think that's important advice, because we, you know, I get that all the time when students show up and do a workshop, and I ask them to bring reference photos, and their reference photos are calendar photos, you know, with all the colors and sunsets. And I'm like, you know, unless you're really adept at handling the medium, you're going to be frustrated and disappointed.
Right. Okay. So Corey is asking, how do you get the power lines to look so natural? You mean the utility poles? Are there any? Because I don't see any power lines in there.
Well, I don't think I put the line. Maybe probably the power poles is what they're talking about. But a big part of that is going back to what I was talking about with that cathedral painting. I didn't mask it out or put tape down there. It's not a perfectly straight line. And in fact, it was almost one big stroke. You can see how it's breaking up at the top as my brush was running out of paint and water. But that's important too, the way you handle it. If it was too stiff, that's going to be another barrier in the painting, even though it's a solid object. You know, I wasn't worried about making it perfect and solid. I turn my paper sideways when I do those tall power poles, and make a brush stroke from side to side. It's a lot easier than trying to go up and down vertically. And if you do it that way, when your brush is first loaded, it's going to be top heavy, and you're going to run out of paint as you go down, which is the opposite of how you should do it. So it's just easier to turn your paper sideways, start at the bottom of that power pole, and do a quick brush stroke, and you get that little bit of a broken stroke. But I think that helps them look a little bit more natural.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna just preach for a minute here to people.
Okay.
Look at how he breaks up in the plane of the buildings. Look at how he's just using the white of the paper as his brightest bright. but he's breaking up the shapes so they're not repeating. They're not, each time you see it, it's a slightly different shape. And so it just reads, the eye just skips across the painting. And then his focal area, of course, is the house. And note the diagonal of the fire escape, and that is echoed by the diagonal on the shadow of the power pole on the right. It's
the tree branches.
And I didn't even notice the tree branches and the tree branches, and the shadow on the riverbank to the left and front of the power pole. But also the other thing I think is very, very important is the stitching vertical that you've got almost in the center of the painting. It's a little to the left of the center of the painting. It's just below the fire escape.
Yep. There's a little tree. Boy,
that is so important, though, to keep that horizontal lightness of the bike path from overpowering.
Yes.
A stitch right there.
Yep.
And you've let the color bleed a little bit on the bike path over on the left, because that horizontal bright is a very strong element, but you've knocked it down by using these little devices.
Yeah. And then when I went to title the painting, just because of the scene itself and the reflection, calling it two stories, not just because of the house, but with the painting, the scene and its reflection down below with the bike path kind of splitting the whole scene in two. I thought that was a fitting title.
Cool. Beautiful piece, Andy.
Thanks. I like this one a lot.
Next one. Oh, now we're taking a different direction. I hate you so much.
I wanted to send a variety. So, it's easier to paint scenes where there's definite shapes and strong sunlight, where you have light and shadow, to define the shapes. And that's another suggestion that I give my students when you're looking for something to paint. Look for something with definite shapes. It doesn't matter what those shapes are, as you just saw, the railroad crossing and an old house. But when you start talking about this, where it's just softness and mist and atmosphere, this, even though it's a quote unquote simple scene, this was one of the most difficult paintings I've done over the past year. Just trying to, again, the timing of it, I couldn't wait too long to put the mountain in the background bluff on the left, because I wanted it to merge with the sky wash on the right, and just slowly trying to take paint off my brush as I worked that direction, so you could see the fog bank coming in, and then how long I had to wait to put the big evergreen tree in, so it wasn't too hard edged and lose the misty atmosphere, but using enough paint so it still looked a little bit soft. And all those things are just so difficult to control with watercolor. So I was happy with the way this one turned out. Also, just, it's not an epic scene by any means, but it was definitely one of the most difficult challenges I've done in the past year.
I can start to understand that now. Yeah, it is, Helen. It is superb.
Thank you.
The fence line is beautiful and lyrical. It's almost calligraphic. It looks like Arabic calligraphy. But then the other thing I want to point out to people, aside from the technical difficulty of what is going on in that sky, and now I am starting to know enough about just how tough that is to get that hard edge on the bluff and then lose the edge as it blends into the sky, which is part of why I hate you. But note, ladies and gentlemen, how he breaks up the line between the field and the trees. That again, there's stitching going on. It's not a hard line all the way across. He loses it and then brings it back, has verticals going up into the dark. And then in the area behind, you've got this the calligraphic line of the fence row in the left foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And that, behind that, is where you come closest to losing entirely the line between the field and the trees by bringing the value so far up. But
Yeah.
even then, you're being very careful to not have it be one straight line. You're not doing one big brushstroke across there.
No, that little gentle slope going up on the left was actually a very important part of the composition. Like you said, to break up that horizontal line. I didn't want it to draw so much attention that it took away from the big pine tree. Kind of making sure that was still the focal area. But yeah, just that little bit of care that you have to take in the distance there to make sure that you're breaking that line up and indicating a few other little trees, so it's not just an empty, boring, part of the painting. So yeah, thanks for noticing that. That is an important part of this. Basically that whole bottom line of it is kind of weaving in and out of the trees as the snow goes in some areas and comes back out.
Yep. Now, is that the last of the slides, or is there one more?
I think so.
Okay, talk a little about the materials, then we're going to talk a little about the class, but talk a little about the materials, Andy.
Okay, so I use a John Pike palette in the studio. It's a nice palette. John Pike, who has an old watercolor book out too. He was someone who taught a lot also. But that palette's available in a lot of art stores online and stuff. And it's about like 18 wells, and I think I only use 12 of them. I have a pretty limited palette. I've got a few blues. I like to use Winsor Newton paints. That's what I learned with. There's a lot of good paints out there. Holbein is a good manufacturer. Daniel Smith is a real popular one.
I'm a Royal Talons ambassador.
Royal Talons, yeah.
So Rembrandt, they just sent me a full set of Rembrandt.
Yeah, good. That's what I mean. There's so many good ones, but I try not to jump around too much with the brands that I'm using, because I know there's so many things that can go wrong already with watercolor. I don't want to have any kind of unfamiliarity with my materials at that point. So once I get comfortable with something, I tend to become a creature of habit and stick with it. The slope was a little bit wet into wet, yeah. But I use Payne's gray, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, cobalt turquoise. I just kind of have a little stretch of cool colors, and then I've got raw sienna, burnt sienna, and neutral tint as kind of my earthy tones. And then I've got just a handful of yellows and reds, quinacridone gold, cadmium lemon, cadmium red, alizarin crimson. And so, but it's basically just a selection of the primary colors. I've got a handful of blues, I've got a handful of warmer yellows and earth tones, and a couple of reds, and everything else is mixed. And so that's important too, to get realistic colors. If you're a landscape painter, get comfortable mixing and neutralizing your palette.
Right. So let's use that as a stepping stone into talking about the class.
Sure.
One of the things I wanted to do, one of the things I was going to do this year was Doug Fryer. You know Doug?
Just by name, I haven't met him.
Oh, a wonderful human being, and a great painter out of Utah. And we were going to do a week of doing monoprints this summer.
Fun.
After Door County, I was going to take the train out to Utah, and we had a studio rented and everything, and then
cool.
And so I was determined I'm going to take this time to try to expand my knowledge base, and you were offering this class through Tucson Art Academy, I believe it is.
Yep. Tucson Art Academy online.
So talk a little about how this class works. And ladies and gentlemen, it's like $700, but it's gives us students a year-long access to your knowledge, correct?
It's an incredible value. The more I think about it, I mean, you just came in the second group here, so you're merging into it in November, but it kicked off in July, and the people who started in July will end the next July, and you'll keep going till the following November. So yeah, you get a year-long mentorship with me. Basically, we're put into a Facebook group where all the interaction happens, the posts and the lessons. So in addition to the pre-recorded demonstration videos that you get for a year to watch and practice, it's broken down into 4 modules basically. So every few months we're kind of switching gears to a new theme. that kind of follows how I teach my workshops, going through value studies and color and integrating figures into it and all that kind of stuff. And so we'll cover everything that I cover in 4 days in a workshop, but the 4-day workshops are almost $700, you know? And then if you're going out of town to take it, you also, I think Gabor from Tucson Art Academy has a breakdown of what it would typically cost to take a 1 week workshop or a 4-day workshop. And it's far more if you have to travel than what this is, what you can do out of your home.
Well,
And so there's great interaction, not only with me, but the other students in the group. They're always supporting each other and commenting on each other's work. And it's kind of an organic thing too. I've never taught anything like this. So I kind of get a feeling for, okay, this issue has come up several times in the group. I need to address this,
right.
you know, with the group. So I'll put another challenge out. And so, you know, there's some structure to it and the pre-recorded videos, but there's also a lot of freedom to just kind of let the course grow as I see that what people need, you know,
right.
through their interactions.
Well, one of the things I'm really appreciating is the ability to go back and rewatch a demo. And this is, I mean, it's true if you own videos or whatever, but
right.
It really, it beats the hell out of taking a workshop. And workshops are fun because then, you know, you have dinner together and you
right.
working together, and then you work together and get frustrated together. But in terms of learning, this is just fantastic. So I can watch you do that one of the parking sign that you're not doing the parking sign. The church.
Oh yeah.
But I can watch that, then go over to the studio and attempt to do it and end up with mice in a paintball match. Then I can come back here and watch it again, you know. And meanwhile, there's the Facebook group where we can kind of share our common frustrations or our bits of knowledge that we have managed to put together. I'm enjoying the hell out of it.
Yeah, and you just started. I mean, I can't believe the group that started in July. By late September, I was telling my wife, and I'm talking to Gabor. I'm just like, I can't believe how much progress they have made in 2 months. You know, and I try, and I can't hop on every day, and I can't comment on every painting, but I try and spend a little time. Some days I have more time, and I'll sit for 2 or 3 hours on Facebook and go through the feed and try and give some good. Not just verbal feedback, but visual feedback. A lot of times they'll take their paintings and put them into Photoshop and make the adjustments and then put it back into the feed so they can get a better sense of what I'm talking about. Right. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you brought that up as far as going back and rewatching the videos, because you don't, there's no way you can comprehend all of that the first time you see it. And you take a workshop and you're watching these demos, and unless you're really just taking notes like mad, and you can understand everything, it's kind of a one-shot deal. Whereas here, you get to see it and do it and practice, and then go back later, and it just, every time you watch it, it makes more sense, and you start picking up on new things that you didn't even hear the first time around, because your brain wasn't ready for it. So yeah, that ability to just keep going back over the course of the year.
How many students were in the first tranche? I like the word tranche. How many were?
Yeah. So they cap it at 100, and that was one of my concerns with Gabor was, that's a lot of students to take, obviously, in a workshop, but not everybody is even on Facebook, and a lot of the students, he told me, I'm the first watercolorist he had. He's got a very small stable of artists. Most of them are oil painters, Matt Smith and Collie Wisson and Ken Backus, and obviously really talented oil painters. But there was starting to get to be a demand for watercolor, so he reached out to me, and he kind of assured me that a lot of these students aren't comfortable posting their work. They want the videos, they want to be in the group and see the feedback, and they're learning that way. And he was right. On that first group, I think there was a core of maybe like 25 or 30 people who seemed to be on there almost every day, posting their work and getting the feedback. So it's very manageable. And then the same thing with this group coming in now, just kind of stitching it in And that's one of the nice things about my schedule for this upcoming year is pretty wide open now, because with everything being canceled, so I can just kind of sit and make sure I'm really focusing on this group.
Right. Well, and my friend Ro Lab says that she was lucky enough to take your class out in Scottsdale.
Oh, wow. That was a while ago.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're feeling like you want to learn about watercolor, there's some great watercolor. There are a bunch of great watercolorists out there, but I'm really loving this class. So thank you, Andy, for taking the time to hang out with us a bit today.
It was fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and I hope to see you. Hopefully, we'll be doing Door County next year. So
I sure hope so. Keep making us laugh, Charlie. We all love you. You're such a great guy, and with the news cycle and everything, it's always fun to tune in and laugh and hear your optimistic view of the world. So really appreciate that.
All right. Well, you take good care. Thank you, Betty Sue.
Thanks, Betty Sue.
Goodbye, everybody. See you next week.